Ja chciałabym zaprosić już Państwa do pierwszego panelu w dniu dzisiejszym. Panel pod tytułem Europe and the United States – Values and Interest in the Emerging Polycentric World. Zapraszam Aleksandra Smolara, moderatora tego panelu, oraz jego gości, których sam przedstawi, pana Stephena Flanagana, pana Pierre'a Hassnera i pana Iwana Krasteva.
Proszę Państwa, mam... Tak? Dobrze. Mam problem językowy i w związku z tym, że ja precedent setting, w jakimś sensie narzucę pewne reguły, myślę, że będę mówił po polsku, zważywszy, że dla większości publiczności tutaj to jest pierwszy język, dla mnie też oczywiście. Chciałbym serdecznie przywitać panelistów. Nie będę ich przedstawiał, dlatego że wszyscy Państwo macie program, gdzie są zwięzłe biogramy. Mamy do czynienia z 3 wybitnymi specjalistami stosunków międzynarodowych i naszym tematem, jak wiecie Państwo, polskiej wersji nie mam, więc tylko powtórzę po angielsku, jest problem Europe and the United States, Values and Interest in the Emerging Polycentric World. Więc tu jest, można powiedzieć, pewna dwuznaczność. Z jednej strony to jest problem wartości i interesów w stosunkach Europy i Stanów Zjednoczonych, ale po drugie Emerging Polycentric World, pojawiający się wielocentryczny, prawda, świat. I ja myślę, że ta dwuznaczność i pewna dialektyka znajdzie odbicie w naszej rozmowie. Ja o tej dialektyce w paru słowach chciałbym powiedzieć. To jest temat, który pojawia się zawsze na różnych konferencjach międzynarodowych. Wiele książek im było poświęcone problemem wartości i interesy. Mi się wydaje, że to, co tutaj w tym temacie jest interesujące, to jest pokazanie pewnej dialektyki, jeżeli zaczniemy od czasów zimnej wojny i ograniczymy się na razie do Europy Zachodniej, wolnej Europy, wolnego świata i Stanów Zjednoczonych, mieliśmy do czynienia z wspólnotą wartości, mówiło się, prawda, wolny świat. To było słowo, które było powszechnie używane i były fundamentalne wspólne wartości, które były związane i obecność wojsk Stanów Zjednoczonych w Europie i powstanie NATO z obroną, prawda, wolnej Europy przed zagrożeniem. No, wówczas nie trzeba mówić to choć o związku ze strony Związku Radzieckiego. Otóż w 1989 roku następuje zmiana. Po pierwsze koniec oczywiście zimnej wojny, upadek 2 lata później, w 1991 roku Związku Radzieckiego. Z punktu widzenia wartości znika ten podwójny świat, to znaczy świat z jednej strony wolny, demokratyczny, praw człowieka, gospodarki rynkowej, z drugiej strony Związek Radziecki jako odrębne uniwersum polityczne, ideologiczne i ekonomiczne. Jak pamiętamy, symbolicznym tekstem dla tego czasu, który w jakimś sensie mówi o jednolitości świata z nadmiernym optymizmem, to było koniec historii, prawda, Franka Fukuyamy. Prawda? To było z nadmiernym optymizmem, ale lata 90. to są lata, kiedy rzeczywiście jest takie wrażenie, jest całkowita dominacja Zachodu, w tym Stanów Zjednoczonych. Pewien wybitny neokonserwatysta mówił o unilateral moment, prawda? To jest ten moment, inni pisali, co nie było w tradycji amerykańskiej, o imperialnej Ameryce, prawda? Chociaż Jefferson mówił, ale miał coś innego na myśli, prawda? Takie poczucie całkowitego panowania Stanów Zjednoczonych. Można powiedzieć, że jeżeli chodzi o wartości Europy, już poszerzonej Europy, nawet jeżeli jeszcze nie byliśmy członkami NATO, to oczywiście już należeliśmy do tego uniwersum. Była wspólnota wartości, jeżeli chodzi o interesy, różnice pojawiają się. To, co jeżeli chodzi o stosunki międzynarodowe, istnieje taka pewna unifikacja, która jest moim zdaniem bardzo istotna. Chciałbym ją tylko zamarkować. Świat zimnej wojny to jest świat często napięcia między wartościami a interesami. To znaczy our bastards are good. To znaczy nasi dyktatorzy, którzy są naszymi sojusznikami przeciwko Związkowi Radzieckiemu, w jakimś sensie to uniewinniało ich dyktatorski charakter i zbrodnie, które często popełniały. Otóż wraz z końcem zimnej wojny znika to napięcie i pojawia się taka moralizacja polityki zagranicznej z różnymi problemami, które to za sobą pociąga, prawda? Pojawia się pojęcie humanitarnej interwencji i praktyka, której szczytowym momentem była interwencji w Kosowie, prawda? Z różnymi komplikacjami, o których może będziemy prawda, mówili. Wtedy pojawia się również inicjatywa, z którą ściśle związane jest nazwisko profesora Bronisława Geremka, to jest Community of Democracy, Wspólnoty Demokracji, 10 lat temu założonej w Warszawie przez Bronisława Geremka i Madeleine Albright. Jeżeli ja pamiętam, było wówczas 107 ministrów spraw zagranicznych, którzy zjechali do Warszawy i było takie poczucie, że powstaje wspólnota krajów demokratycznych, ogromna, 107 państw. W 10. rocznicę odbyło się niedawno to spotkanie takie podobne w Krakowie. Przepraszam uczestników, którzy tam brali udział, ale nie miało to takiego rozgłosu i nie miało takiego znaczenia. Moim zdaniem dlatego, że w latach ostatniej dekady następują dość istotne zmiany i tylko parę słów na ten temat powiem. W wyniku szeregu sekwencji zdarzeń 9/11, to znaczy atak terrorystyczny, wojna w Iraku i później można powiedzieć kryzys finansowy, nastąpiło szereg faktów, które podważyły ten optymizm lat 90. Nagle okazało się, że jest alternatywa dla świata zachodniego, że to, co uważano tożsamość demokracji z rozwojem, że rozwój wymaga demokracji wraz z przykładem Chin, okazało się przynajmniej jak na razie, że to nie jest prawda, że Chiny stają się, to mówi się teraz, prawda, pekińskie konsensus, a nie waszyngtońskie konsensus. Chiny stają się dla bardzo wielu państw wzorem, a nie Washington konsensus, nie ten konsensus, który utożsamiano z Waszyngtonem. I tutaj również w sposób oczywisty następuje oddalanie się od siebie Stanów Zjednoczonych i Europy. Można powiedzieć, że na początku w związku z Irakiem to raczej Europa, część Europy, która oddalała się od Stanów Zjednoczonych, teraz odnosi się wrażenie, że to raczej Stany Zjednoczone prezydenta Obamy zwracają się zupełnie ku innym regionom i Europa odgrywa znacznie mniejszą rolę. Tu pojawia się dopiero prawdziwe pytanie, to znaczy jaka jest przyszłość, jakie jest szanse na znów głębsze zjednoczenie Europy i Stanów Zjednoczonych, jeżeli chodzi o wartości, których fundamentalne wartości pozostają te same i jeżeli chodzi o interesy, jakie są warunki, które muszą być spełnione przez jedną i przez drugą stronę. I teraz w kolejności alfabetycznej chciałbym poprosić Steve'a Flanagana o zabranie głosu. The floor is yours. No, wherever you wish, you can speak here or there.
Thank you, Mr. Smolar. Is this on? Yes. Okay, thank you, Mr. Smolar. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here to honor the memory of President Professor Geremek and former Minister Geremek on this occasion. I had the good fortune to meet Mr. Geremek in 1990 when I came here as part of a delegation from the U.S. State Department to begin the first policy planning talks with Poland as a sign of normalization of our relations. And I also had the good fortune to then travel with him 9 years later to Independence, Missouri for the signing of the accession documents for Poland and the other members of the Gang of Three to NATO. So it is indeed a great honor, and I'm feeling very nostalgic at this moment to come back and have this opportunity. But enough nostalgia. I'm not here to look back, but to look forward. And although I was interested to see that, well, communism is dead in Poland, the dialectic remains. And I'll try to address some of Mr. Smolar's questions about the intersection between interest and values and polycentrism. But I do want to make the realpolitik case that as you look at the charge to this panel and questioning whether or not the interests remain the same. The values, remain very much the same between Europe and the United States. Are our interests diverging and becoming more divergent? I would argue, indeed, I'll take the contrarian position. I think that they remain largely convergent, the broader strategic interests. We have many policy differences, particularly in the economic sphere, but also in aspects of security and politics. But I think that largely the transatlantic relationship remains very strong, and because of the fact that it is a values-based relationship as well as one based in hard national interests, that it has a different character than some of the other partnerships. You hear this word in Washington mentioned frequently, reflecting the polycentrism of, that is required in a period of globalization, that, well, we have to work with a broader range of partners around the world. In many countries, we have very differing shades of partnership and degrees of partnership. But I think that there is a fundamentally, qualitatively different nature to a partnership, to a alliance relationship, first of all, and then which has mutual security commitments, but also an alliance relationship that is rooted in values and that is reflected in values, but also the values that we share with the other countries that have signed the Helsinki Final Act and the other documents. And to those that live by those values, indeed, it gives a fundamental difference and a fundamental character to that partnership. Now, there's also a great current here, I hear, in Central Europe, both from visitors from the region and as I traveled even around Warsaw and earlier in Bratislava, the sense that, well, the United States is preoccupied with many other global activities, and somehow Central Europe, and indeed perhaps Europe as a whole, isn't as important to the United States anymore. Well, I think that the real assessment is more something like this. The fact is that it's true that Central Europe, and in large measure Europe as a whole, is not the strategic focal point of American political leadership. But that's a good news story. That's something to celebrate. When it was such a focal point, over the darkest days of the Cold War, when there was an immediate risk that a crisis in Central Europe could escalate into a thermonuclear war, well, absolutely that was going to be the strategic preoccupation. When there was a desire to bring down the end of that confrontation and to promote differing political and to follow through to the commitments of the North Atlantic Treaty and promote our values to the countries that were suffering under communist domination, obviously that was Central Europe, and the rest of Europe remained a focal point. But now, in this world of globalization, where not only the security problems, but so many of the other challenges emanate from outside, Europe is not solved, certainly. No one would ever say that in Washington, and I don't think any serious policy player ever says that Europe is, quote-unquote, solved. We know that there are nagging problems, and first of all, in deepening democracy in the countries that embraced democracy after 1989. We know that there are continuing and risk of conflict in the Caucasus and elsewhere in other parts of the former Soviet space. We know that there remain questions that we can't rule out the possibility of conflict anymore in Europe, particularly after the war in Georgia. So. But that doesn't mean, though, that there needs to be this day-to-day sort of preoccupation with European affairs in Washington. Because what are we asking for? What we're asking for, and if you look at one of the core tenets of both the Obama administration's foreign policy and the foreign policy of indeed the Bush, and going back to the Clinton, I would argue even back to President Bush 41, what the United States is looking for is a Europe that is globally engaged in helping us promote development and security around the world. Because as you look at and again, just to look at the stark reality in an era of globalization, why should the Atlantic Alliance continue to exist? Why should these partnerships with Europe still remain? Because if you do if you do a strict calculus, as we did a few years ago, and just looking at sources of power and influence and who is benefiting from globalization, well, roughly the 31 treaty allies that the United States has, the European members of NATO plus our East Asian allies, and a number of other countries around the world that are largely democratic, those are the core countries that are benefiting most from globalization. Those are the countries that have seen the growth and the rapid development, and indeed we've seen it so much in Central and Eastern Europe over the last 2 decades, that those countries have a vested interest. They have a strategic interest in partnering with us, and we have a strategic interest in partnering with them to advance our common interests. So I think, and then as you look at the nature of these challenges, despite the enormity of American power and despite the rise of the rest, or the sense of that there's a diminishment and a relative decline of U.S. power, no matter that remains, that the United States remains the most capable country in addressing many of the multifaceted problems, particularly in the security domain, but also in other areas. But with all of those problems, whether you look at international terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, dealing with failed states, promoting growth in the developing world, climate change, financial stability. None of these problems can be solved either by the United States or by even that core group. So it gets us to the point about polycentrism. We need to develop this wider array of partners that we as the core group of democracies that are benefiting from globalization can partner with this wider group of countries that also are interested in playing by the norms of the international system that have developed with regard to aspects of finance, of various aspects of conduct of international relations. Those countries that are, as we've used in the term with regard to China, with regard to Russia, a responsible stakeholder in the international system, when those countries abide by the rules, they too can be part of this effort to deal with many of these common global challenges that affect all of our interests. So many of these problems that I just ticked off that dominate that preoccupy policymakers in Washington and Europe today, they are problems that affect all our countries and in some way or another. And many of these countries have varying degrees of interest in partnering with us. So I think that's sort of where I come out on the notion, does Europe still matter? Yes, I would say Europe is yes, indeed, not the focal point of daily policy debate in Washington any longer, but there's a recognition that it is essential. It is an essential partner in advancing any of these, both our own national interests, but advancing solutions to any of these complex global challenges that I ticked off earlier in my comments. So that sort of by way of sort of where my strategic assessment is. Let me just say a few other words, though, about what and let me just so you're not just to show that I'm also reflecting official policy. The national security strategy that was articulated earlier this year, and talking about some of the core principles that drive the Obama administration, put it this way. It said, and I'm quoting here, the starting point for collective action in addressing many of these global challenges will be our engagement with other countries. The cornerstone of this engagement is the relationship between the United States and our close friends and allies in Europe, Asia, the Americas, and the Middle East, ties which are rooted in shared interest and shared values and which serve our mutual security and the broader security and prosperity of the world. So that document put in much more concise terms what I just spent 5 minutes saying to you. But I just want to show that is also reflective in, I mean, this is a document that was heavily debated within the administration over how do we articulate what the administration's worldview is. So this is the assessment. Now, let me just say that the other question I sometimes hear, if I have a couple more minutes, I'm sorry. I didn't put a watch up here for me. What is the agenda then? What is the agenda for action? And I think we've seen much of it over even just the last few months of some of the key problems that have been addressed. But you're beginning with the financial crisis, and here obviously we did see, and obviously the economic relationship between the United States and Europe has always been some of the most difficult part of the relationship, not just wars over bananas or other kind of trade issues, but the fact is that it is a fundamentally competitive relationship as well as a partnership. And we saw the intense differences that existed at the beginning of the financial crisis last year over the size of the stimulus versus how much a focal point should be an enhancement of global financial regulations. And we did see a period where it wasn't clear how this was going to come out. But I think you look over the last few weeks and even earlier this month with the achievement of this Basel III agreement, where we've made great strides in transatlantic cooperation after a long and protracted debate. We've come down probably in a way that doesn't completely satisfy all of the European governments, some elements that certainly don't satisfy all of the U.S. financial services community, but I think we've come up with a set of regulations that's not my area of expertise, but from everything I read suggests that we certainly have a fundamentally different beginning that will unfold over the next several years in the global financial system and the regulation thereof. But beyond that, there's so many other areas that we have a common interest. Obviously, the United States policymakers who are in the know recognize that Europe as a whole, and both the Union and individual countries, particularly in Western Europe, give a much larger percentage of GDP to overseas development assistance. And the United States and Europe have oftentimes coordinated their assistance in giving and ensuring that they're trying to achieve the same effects in various countries and attaching the same conditionality. which some other countries don't always attach and then undermine the goals of good governance and other aspects of policy coordination that we seek to achieve among the OECD countries and particularly in the US-EU cooperation in this area. And so we had the period, a very successful period, where we were coordinating our assistance with the EU to Central and Eastern Europe. We were coordinating our assistance to Russia and the former Soviet space. And that is now continuing, I think, in many other aspects of dealing with the developing world and in addressing other problems. Nuclear nonproliferation is another area where we've seen great strides. Despite some hesitation on the part of the Bush administration, initially it joined the EU process, which again morphed into the P5+1. And then showing that, well, obviously it hasn't stopped the Iranian nuclear program. We've seen a remarkable degree of solidarity in dealing with this looming global threat, and particularly vis-a-vis Iran. So another example of how this kind of solidarity, that again is polycentric, it is including Russia, it is including other countries that want to be cooperating with the P5 countries in achieving this goal of slowing the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Lastly, I do think, and since we have a number of Russian participants, I wanted to say that there is a big part of the US-European agenda that should be focused on Russia and engagement of Russia. And here I will declare I am a Rotfeldian in having just read Daniel's article from Gazeta, which has been happily translated to English. But just to be quick about it, I do think that we still have a great deal of unfinished business, both with regard to Russia's relationship with NATO. We've had the reset of relationships with the United States and a number of European countries. But now we must move forward in further integration of Russia and cooperation with Russia to the extent to which Russia is willing and wants to partner with us in addressing some of these common security concerns. I think we need to try every avenue and move forward as we look at the NATO summit coming up, as we look beyond that, where we can find a common ground in addressing many of these challenges in the security area that I just alluded to. And so I do think that we have a great opportunity here to continue to work as a US-European partnership in looking eastward. There's also elements of the US-EU Eastern Partnership, which I should also mention, which is another common project that I think the United States and Europe, certainly the United States is looking to the EU for a lead on this, but to work with the countries, particularly the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, who can most convincingly go forward to those other countries in the Caucasus, in other parts of Eastern Europe, and talk to them about the process of transformation. And so the United States now is a supporting player with the European lead, with perhaps a Central European, very Central European leading edge, talking to other Central Europeans about how you can transform your society in the economic sphere, in the political sphere, and deep in civil society. So I think we have a number of common projects left undone, and I don't mistake a lack of appearance on Central European territory or a daily news from Washington about European policy for a lack of interest in working with Europe in advancing our common interests and values. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pierre Hassner, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I'm afraid my remarks will be both more anecdotal and more abstract, more rambling and less centered on foreign policy, more on the evolution of our societies. But first I would, divergent or convergent, I would like also, since that's why we're here, to say a word of memory about Professor Geremek. I remember a wonderful course he gave in Paris, in which he was at the Collège de France, where he was speaking of the conspiracy of the lepers, and having in mind movements of mass hysteria of our time. And he told me a story that this was to be his final work, and that once boating on a lake, he almost drowned, and said, my God, I'm going to die and I haven't written my lepers. And then he became foreign minister, and every year when I was meeting him, I was saying, what about your lepers? And once he said, well, I have good news from you. There are going to be elections. We are going to lose them, and I can go back to my lepers. But in fact, he didn't do it, and he continued to be very active in European politics, European Parliament, in the intellectual debate, and it was, in fact, the same activity as this course on the lepers, always dealing with the forces of irrationality and how to limit them in political and human life. Now, one word which I won't develop, I'm always a little bit uneasy about the problems posed in terms of values and interest. I think values is too subjective a term, interest is too falsely objective a term, and both are a little bit too static. I don't think, for instance, the values or the interests of the Netherlands have changed in the last year, or the attitudes, the reactions have changed completely since the two assassinations which took place. So I prefer to speak about priorities, about reactions, without going so far as Macmillan, who was asking what is driving your policy, and he said, events, my dear boy, events. But there is this part which is very, very important. And secondly, I think we are talking about America and Europe, but in a way, the crux of what I'm saying is that both are very divided. America is very polarized today, and Europe, unfortunately, I'm a European federalist forever, but Europe is very divided itself, and there are both within Europe and the United States great factors of division, and beyond Europe and the United States, great common problems, commons to the West or commons to the world, climate, migration, corruption, and so on, which are terrorism, which are more and more dominating the scene as compared to the classical interest. Now, a few anecdotal things. 3 years ago, my friend and successor here, Ivan Krastev, wrote a book, an article called The Anti-American Century, which was a kind of parody of the appeal for a new American century done by the neo-conservatives at the time, I think in 1998. And I wrote an article starting with saying whatever the next century will be, it won't be an American century, but it doesn't have to be an anti-American century. It will be much more complex. Secondly, 2 years ago, usually I'm a pessimist, but I had a lapse into optimism. When Obama came, I said, well, sometimes the United States and Europe are diverging, sometimes they are converging. There was a great part of divergence during the Bush administration, the first administration of Bush II, the Iraq War, and so on. But now, usually, America is to the right of Europe. There is a book by the two editors of The Economist called The Right Nation, and Europe more to the left. But here, the center right is winning everywhere in Europe, and in America there is going to be with Obama, if not a New Deal, but a certain turn towards the center left. So maybe now, if it works, they can win, they can meet both ways. And if we look 2 years after that, it looks in a way very different, because what I had underestimated, which is brought back by a book I hadn't liked so much when it appeared, by Anatol Lieven, that there are two Americas. There is the America of globalization, of optimism, of both an agent and profiting of the open universe and globalization, but there is also another America which fears change, which once, as people of the Tea Party have just had almost as a slogan, we want America as it used to be, and who are constantly really fearing that Washington, the government, or the United Nations, or the external world is going to come and to rule them. And this is incredibly vocal nowadays with an incredible rage. And as a European, I always find I'm interested in the passions in international relations, that the Europeans are not not passionate enough, at least about Europe, but that there is a rage in the world, a rage among Muslims, and a rage in America, in a fraction of the population, where Paul Krugman recently wrote, but where does this rage come? Where does it go? Where will it lead America? And one cannot but have this anxiety and find that in a way Obama made his fame in 2004 at the Democratic Convention by preaching reconciliation, saying there's not a red America, blue America, black, white, rich, poor, we are all Americans. And he tried to do the same in the international world, extending his hand to everybody in a number of really admirable speeches to Cairo or whatever. And where are we 2 years ago? America has never been so polarized, and the world is also a world absolutely full of conflict, and Bush lost because he had the economic crisis, Iraq war, and Katrina, and Obama has the Afghanistan war, an unfinished Iraq war, the economic crisis, and the oil spill. So this contrast between the enthusiasm with which we all had Obama and where the world and Obama are there, I cannot share the so great optimism. I think there are problems for all of us, which are really dramatic, and which we must, in some ways, we must change our ways to front them together. Now, another anecdotal thing, in the last 2 days, what should America do? There is, in the Washington Post, there was an article by my favorite columnist of the Washington Post, who was a Polish lucky, is also the wife of the Polish foreign minister, Anne Applebaum, called the Austerity and Alien World. And she went back to England and said the English are absolutely reveling in austerity. They leave 1940 again. The government cuts savagely. They said more and more of it, and so on. Whereas in the United States, a billionaire has the idea that there should be less tax cuts for the hedge funds, compared it to the Nazi invasion of Poland. And there is this extremely violent refusal of that. Not only what I said, the fundamentalistic, and Europeans don't have to teach America lessons. America escaped both fascism and communism, which we had, but there is a certain aspect of obscurantism today which looks extraordinary to a European. But some of the Europeans, certainly not all, are putting the emphasis on new austerity, and in a new world we have to change our ways. In yesterday's Herald Tribune, there was an article by the non-executive chairman of Morgan Stanley for Asia, Steve Roach, called Look Eastward America, where he says we should learn from the Chinese, from the Asians who have stability and so on, and America should change of 15 years of living beyond its means, of not saving less and consuming too much, and so on. So on, here's everywhere this cry, which I think in a way is justified, whether we look at the environment, whether it look at the consumption of the rest of the world, whether we look at foreign adventures, we should be more moderate, we should be more modest. And this is a question which for me is a real question. I think you cannot live by moderation alone. I think for instance, on Iraq, on Afghanistan, the Europeans had the sense that you can win a decisive a victory, militarily decisive at the beginning in Iraq or Afghanistan, but what do you do afterwards? How do you transform the country? Can you stay there for a generation? Can you do something in a few years? And George W. Bush said, I'm optimistic because I know I'm right, and going ahead. On this, I think those of the Europeans who were skeptical were right. On the other hand, you can't live by moderation alone, and I'm not sure we want an America which is no longer optimistic and which no longer cares about the world. But in the polls, for the first time, Americans are pessimistic about their future. So this is my concern, that Europeans should be more active and more daring, and that Americans should be more moderate, less daring, but not too much.
Thank you very much, and Ivan Krastev.
Thank you. I also started with something personal concerning Professor Geremek, because it's very rare that you remember when you learn some name for the first time. And I remember very well when for the first time I read his name. It was 1980, and Sofia was not very much like Dansk. And I was a student, and we have these classes in civic education. So I have a task to make a presentation on the solidarity movement in class. And basically, you should read the literature, and solidarity movement was slightly a problem for the Bulgarian papers because you have workers on the wrong side. So basically, the major line was the workers were fine, but there were 2, 3, 4 perverse intellectuals who basically spoiled everything, and this was the names of Geremek, Michnik, Kuron. So when you're 15, you remember only the bad names. So from this point of view, this is where for the first time, basically, I learned the name, and I was lucky to see him after this. But I'll start with, first of all, agreeing very much that this distinction between values and interests are not going to help us very much to orient in the world we are. Because in a certain way, when we talk values and interests, we're taking certain values which are important for us, and not being interested, for example, for values being important for others. Anti-colonialism is such an important sentiment in the third world that it can put together countries like, for example, Brazil and Turkey going closer to Iran on certain issues. But in our understanding and talk of this, we're never going to take it seriously because it was not part of our experience. So what I'll start with is, there is a certain paradox in the current relations between the United States and Europe. If you read the public opinion polls, and just yesterday, you have the transatlantic trends being released, President Obama is more popular in Europe than he is in the White House. 78% of the Europeans approve his foreign policy. This is kind of too much for everything. If you go on the level of trade and investment, you're going to see that the American investments in the Republic of Ireland are higher than the American investments in India and China taken together. These are figures. If you go and see the major fears from 5 years, for example, America fear that European Union is interested to counterbalance the United States. Nobody in Europe these days is about counterbalancing. And on the other side, the fear that the United States is interested to basically split European Union. No fear also on European side that anybody is doing this. And nevertheless, that the fears are not there, that the investment are here, there is a major confusion. And the major confusion comes from the fact, and I very much agree with the previous speakers, for the first time in 500 years, Europe is moving from the center to the periphery in international politics. We are very good at talking about periphery. I do believe we're going to understand what it is to be a periphery. I do believe that what is happening to Europe in a certain way is what happened to the Portugal and others during their kind of a post-imperial periods. Why? Because what is, in my view, at the essence now of the relations between the United States and Europe is that on one level, United States is not a European power in the way it was before. And this is best seen in the relations between the United States and Russia. United States developed a very interesting and, in my view, very successful relationship with Russia, but this is Russia as a global power. Americans are interested to talk to the Russians about nuclear power, about Iran, about Afghanistan. What they're not interested to talk about is Ukraine, Georgia, Europe. On the other side, Americans are very scared because they talk with the Europeans about the world. And there are many things about which Europeans are ready to talk, but there are several about which they are not ready to talk. One is Afghanistan. Do you know which is the European public, according to the last poll, which is most skeptical about Afghanistan? Britain. British public is the most skeptical about the chances to winning in Afghanistan. But talking about Poland, do you know which is the public that is most mistrustful to NATO today in Europe? Poland. Why I'm saying this? Because basically the major difference now comes from the fact that we want to talk about different things. And Europeans are scared about EU's lack of interest of being European powers, and Americans are scared about Europe's lack of will or capacity to be a global power. And I do believe this is important, and here I'm going to my last point. I do believe that people are wrong when they try basically to imagine that the future is really going to be very much like the past. I don't expect that the way the US and China are going to relate to each other is going to be the way the United States and Soviet Union related before. What has happened, in my view, and this is a major problem for both US and European Union, is that the West as a whole lost the monopoly to draft the agenda. This is not only about values and interests. It's about who frames the question. Because before we have been framing the questions, and some of the others have been giving different answers, but this was the answers to our questions. Now they're starting to frame it on their own. And from this point of view, the biggest challenge to the relations between US and EU, in my view, is much more about collaboration of imaginations. How we can have the convergence of our strategic imaginations and not so much basically the value gap or the interest gap. And from this point of view, I do believe here the major problem is, in my view, very good article by a French scholar, Zaki Laidi. The problem is that European Union very much is a risk-averse power as a security identity. European Union views the world in the way insurance companies view it. On the other side, Americans are still very much military planners, also because of the capacity what they have. Having a talk about the future between a general and the head of the insurance company is not easy, but I do believe this is the future for us.
Now, the floor is yours. Państwo mogą teraz zabierać głos. Bardzo proszę o przedstawianie się, bo domyślam się, że jest rejestrowana nasza debata. Piotr Nowina-Konopka.
Dziękuję bardzo. Ja obserwuję. Słychać, tak? Świetnie. Obserwuję od kilku miesięcy Amerykę z Waszyngtonu i muszę powiedzieć, że to, co Stephen Flanagan powiedział o zmianie sytuacji, że Europa przestała być interesująca dla Stanów, dlatego że przestała być problemem, ja myślę, że to pokazuje pewną mylną drogę, kiedy próbujemy odpowiedzieć sobie na pytanie o wspólnotę wartości i wspólnotę interesów. Znacznie bardziej mi odpowiada ten kierunek, który Iwan podał przed chwilą, formułując to pytanie who frames the question? Bo to jest zmiana, która rzeczywiście nastąpiła. Ona nie nastąpiła tylko w Europie, która straciła swoją rolę w świecie, ale ona następuje również w Stanach, które tracą dotychczasową pozycję w świecie. I wydaje mi się, że pytając się o wspólnotę wartości i interesów, trzeba sobie właśnie to pytanie zadać. Czy Stany Zjednoczone i Unia Europejska są w stanie domówić się do tego stopnia, żeby wspólnie stawiać pytania światu? Kiedy Stany próbują na własną rękę rozmawiać z Chinami, efekty nie są nadzwyczajne. Kiedy Europa próbuje na własną rękę rozmawiać z Rosją czy z Chinami, obojętne, efekty nie są nadzwyczajne. patrząc z Waszyngtonu, zadaję sobie coraz częściej pytanie, czy przypadkiem nie jest tak, że potrzebna jest wola po obu stronach, żeby stworzyć wspólny front, żeby przywrócić tą idealną, kiedyś wirtualną wspólnotę, już nie na pozycji Ameryki, która broni praw człowieka w Europie na przykład, tylko z pozycji równych partnerów, którzy mają w gruncie rzeczy bardzo podobne interesy, także dlatego, że mają wspólne wartości.
Zbigniew Lewicki, Warszawski Uniwersytet. Słuchając tych wystąpień, przy których tyle się mówiło na temat Chin, na temat tracenia roli przez Stany Zjednoczone czy Europę, zacząłem się zastanawiać, jaki właściwie problem światowy Chiny, Indie czy którekolwiek z tych państw rozwiązało lub zamierza rozwiązać. I wydaje mi się, krótko mówiąc, że takiego obszaru nie ma. Jeżeli przyjmiemy tradycyjnie, ale dość rozsądnie, że mocarstwo to jest to państwo, które bierze na siebie odpowiedzialność nie tylko za siebie, ale także za świat lub za część tego świata, to chyba zobaczymy dość wyraźnie, nie negując oczywiście gospodarczej potęgi Chin i ich rozwoju, ale ani teraz, ani w założonych przez Chiny celach, o ile wiemy, nie mieści się odpowiedzialność za rozwój wydarzeń w świecie, tylko po prostu tradycyjnie, do tej pory przynajmniej w chińskim myśleniu, zamkniętym tym murem. Podobnie chyba te wszystkie inne państwa, którymi tak się niezwykle fascynujemy. Ale są problemy na świecie, będą. Czy one są lepiej rozwiązywane w Iraku, czy Afganistanie, czy gorzej, to inna sprawa. Więc albo uznamy, że nie potrzebujemy nikogo, kto by chciał się spróbować zmierzyć z trudnym problemem, i wtedy możemy powiedzieć, że rzeczywiście nie potrzebujemy Ameryki, nie potrzebujemy silnej Europy. No albo jednak uznamy, że te nasze fascynacje wschodem tak naprawdę oznaczają tyle tylko, że z pewną masochistyczną przyjemnością ogłaszamy śmierć Stanów Zjednoczonych czy Europy jako mocarstwa światowego i nic tego nie zastępuje, bo nie widzę, powtarzam, w jaki sposób, według jakich kryteriów czy jakiego doświadczenia historycznego moglibyśmy uczciwie powiedzieć, że Chiny lub inne mocarstwa azjatyckie chcą, pragną wziąć odpowiedzialność za cokolwiek poza samymi sobą.
Janusz Onyszkiewicz. W czasie prezydentury poprzedniej Europa była w sytuacji dosyć komfortowej, dlatego że mogła się pozycjonować według takiego schematu, który czasami w Polsce się określa ciocia na balu, a więc ciocia siedzi i ma za złe. Innymi słowy, Europa mogła po prostu, ponieważ uważała, że Stany Zjednoczone nie przywiązują wagi do Europy, nie jakby szukają wsparcia w Europie, Europa mogła po prostu krytykować Stany Zjednoczone dosyć swobodnie. W sytuacji obecnej, kiedy jest prezydentura Obamy, Europa się może znaleźć w innej zupełnie sytuacji. Mianowicie Stany Zjednoczone będą chciały mieć w Europie partnera. Pytanie jest tylko takie, czy Europa będzie w stanie dostarczyć odpowiednio, deliver, czy Europa będzie w stanie, tak powiem, podjąć działania i czy brak tej możliwości, który zresztą brak sprawia, że Europa przestaje być mocarstwem, bo się wycofuje po prostu z wielkiej polityki światowej. Czy ten brak nie sprawi, że w Stanach Zjednoczonych będzie narastać rozczarowanie Europą i szukanie jakichś innych partnerów?
Daniel Fried, USA. I'll have more to say tomorrow, but I want to associate myself with what Zbigniew Lewicki and Janusz Onyszkiewicz just said. There's an American saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. If the United States and Europe fail to set the agenda, we're not going to like the result. whatever, I've thought this divergence of values was exaggerated in the Bush administration. But that's another discussion. There's something to it, but any divergence of values we might have had is overwhelmed by our commonality of values and the true differences of values we will see if other emerging world powers start setting the global agenda. So we have some serious work to do, but I'll say more tomorrow.
Ja może będę kontynuował to, co powiedział przed chwilą Dan Fried, ale troszeczkę w innym ujęciu. To znaczy, jak chciałem, jeśli tak można powiedzieć, ująć to problemowo, jak konceptualnie. Znaczy, intencja moja jest taka, żeby zastanowić się, co jest ideą organizującą nasze myślenie o świecie. I do tej pory tą ideą była rola mocarstw, w tym po zakończeniu zimnej wojny, rola Stanów Zjednoczonych. Otóż nie ulega wątpliwości, że Stany Zjednoczone dzisiaj nie mają ambicji, żeby spełniać taką rolę, jaką niektórzy politycy amerykańscy mieli, znaczy taką rolę, która zakładała, że są one omnipotentne. One są nadal potentne, są potężne, ale nie są wszechpotężne. To jest pierwszy punkt. Ale takie same poczucie mają wszystkie inne mocarstwa. I rzecz polega na tym, że Stany Zjednoczone nadal zachowują szczególną pozycję jako państwo, mocarstwo niezbędne. Można sobie wyobrazić, że z mapy świata niektóre mocarstwa wyparują, ale nie można sobie wyobrazić, że Stany Zjednoczone wyparują. Innymi słowy, pierwszy element jest taki, że zmienia się rola Stanów Zjednoczonych i niebezpieczeństwo polega na tym, żeby zrozumieć, jaka jest logika myślenia przywódców amerykańskich, którzy chcą pozyskać społeczeństwo. Otóż problem polega w moim przekonaniu na tym, że problemy dzisiejszego świata nie są między państwami, tylko wewnątrz państw, również wewnątrz Stanów Zjednoczonych. To nie klęska w Iraku czy Afganistanie, ale Katrina spowodowała, że Amerykanie uświadomili sobie swoją słabość. To nie problemy Rosji ze światem zewnętrznym, tylko wewnętrzne problemy uświadomiły sobie Rosji, że trzeba bardzo dużo zmienić. To samo dotyczy Europy, a co się tyczy Chin, Indii, Brazylii, to one nie chcą świadomie, kiedyś mocarstwa chciały wykorzystać swoją pozycję i wyjść poza tę rangę, jak uzyskały pewien potencjał, zacząć oddziaływać na kształtowanie świata zewnętrznego. Dzisiaj Chiny nie chcą świadomie, mimo że mają te możliwości, tej roli wykorzystywać do tego celu. Również Indie, również Brazylia. Otóż to pytanie, które było, że skoro te mocarstwa nie chcą, to one nie są mocarstwami globalnymi. Otóż to jest błąd. One są mocarstwami globalnymi, ale paradygmat myślenia o świecie zmienił się. I mam wrażenie, że nie ma jakiejś takiej jednoczącej, jednej koncepcji, która by pozwoliła nam odpowiedzieć na pytanie, to w jaki sposób wobec tego ten system światowy będzie się kształtował. Bardzo jest u wielu taka potrzeba inercji. Znaczy, że tak jak było do tej pory, będziemy postępować tylko lepiej, w sposób bardziej doskonały, zawrzemy nowe porozumienie, stworzymy nową instytucję. Otóż żadna nowa instytucja, żadne nowe porozumienie, to wymaga po prostu zmiany myślenia. Ja mówię o tym w bardzo dużym skrócie, ale z prośbą, żeby mnie ewentualnie skorygowali albo poparli nasi paneliści. Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo.
To, co zwraca uwagę w Europie, spędziłem 3 miesiące w Berlinie ostatnio, to nie jest myślenie na przykład antynatowskie. To jest myślenie pozanatowskie, a NATO thing. Znaczy to się po prostu nie pojawia w dyskusji. Kiedy mówimy o problemach, nawet w kontekście wyzwań i zagrożeń bardziej bezpośrednich, bardzo często pojawia się wątek bilateralny z tym lub z tym krajem, które są bezpośrednio zainteresowane, as stakeholders używa się. Natomiast nie ma odwołania się do NATO. Na przykład w Berlinie, myśląc o polityce wschodniej, mówiło się bardzo dużo o wspólnocie polsko-niemieckiej, z Czechami, z innymi, natomiast bardzo rzadko odwoływano się do Unii Europejskiej, polityki wschodniej Unii Europejskiej. Co mnie prowadzi do pytania nie tyle co do dyskusji na temat wartości, bo tutaj jakby te wartości zidentyfikować, to jestem przekonany, że większość opinii publicznej po obu stronach Atlantyku by się zgodziła, tylko myślenia w kategoriach bardzo wąskiego interesu gospodarczego. Niech się ratuje kto się może w warunkach kryzysu finansowego, zwłaszcza teraz. On na tyle zaprząta umysły, że sprawy strategiczne kompletnie zaczynają znikać. To po prostu jest proces polityczny, plus zmiany pokoleniowe. To jest bardzo interesujące, że w Polsce mamy tak szybkie odejście od myślenia pronatowskiego. Ja to oglądam z fascynacją. W jakimś sensie stajemy się bardziej in mainstream of Europe. W niekoniecznie tym dobrym sensie. Ale we just enjoy being Europeans. Po prostu nasi młodzi współobywatele cieszą się tym, co mają. I myślenie w kategoriach wyzwań, tym bardziej, że pod wpływem eskapady irackiej jest brak zaufania do the American leadership, do przywództwa amerykańskiego. Po prostu success breeds success. Ani Irak, ani Afganistan to nie jest sukces. I nawet jak większość opinii polskiej opinii publicznej, czy europejskiej opinii publicznej jest przeciwko na przykład wojnie w Afganistanie, to w Polsce nie ma wielkich, ani w Czechach, ani na Słowacji, nie ma wielkich protestów przeciwko naszej tam obecności. To tkwi, ale to nie wywołuje wielkich emocji. Lack of success breeds pessimism. To jest...
Thank you. I appreciate very much this debate on the issue of values and interests. I will speak more substantively tomorrow on some other panel, but I want to participate in this debate because I want to deliver a very simple and perhaps even a very superficial idea when speaking about interests and values. And the idea is that very often, it is very often the case of many other issues. The problem is with finding appropriate balance between different aspects of the reality. And we have had experienced this in the development of my own country. Let me remind just a few elements of this development. If you remember, the Soviet Union started to overcome the old thinking with the idea of de-ideologization. I apologize for such a nasty word, but this was the idea to get rid of ideology, to get rid of values which were considered at that time as outdated and not responding to the new challenges and to the new orientation of the country. So this was the first step, to get rid of ideology. Then the next stage, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was something absolutely different. It was over-ideologization. It was the idea of the new elites which came to power after the collapse of the Soviet Union to focus upon the West, to follow the West, to follow the United States, to follow this Western predicament, Western choice. So it was excessive ideologization, which was considered by many as a very appropriate choice of the country, but which resulted in a very considerable disappointment, but very substantial part of the Russian elites. Because the result of this was that many Russians, at least on the level of elites, I'm not discussing now whether it was a right or a wrong perception, but many started to think that Russia was downgraded to the position of the second or a third-class power exactly because it became too Western-oriented. There were too many Western-oriented values which were kept responsible for such a kind of evolution of Russia. Then the next stage, we started to say that, listen, we should forget about ideology. Russia should not be pro-Western or pro-European or pro-American. Russia should be pro-Russian. National interest is the main element of the foreign policy. Foreign policy, security policy, or whatever, should be based on Russian national interest. So this was a big slogan, in Putin's time, at the beginning of Putin era, if I can say. We should focus upon, first of all, upon Russia's national interests. It was the period of the predominance of interest at the expense of values. What is the result? The result is that we got in a kind of a new confrontation with the Western countries, that Russia's foreign policy has not been excessively successful during the last decades, and we have now to find a new balance, a new relationship between interests and values. And I'm trying to be hopeful, I'm trying to be positive about my own country, but I think that what is now we are trying to do is to find this new balance between interests and values. And I think that the conclusions that we could make from our own history, and maybe this could be a conclusion for Europe also, and for European-American relations, the conclusion is the following. The relationship between partners should be based on interests, but it should not be based only on interests. If it is based only on interests, then it cannot be stable and long-oriented. But at the same time, if this relationship is based only on values, then this relationship could be deprived of stability and sustainability. So more and more I'm studying the international relations and foreign policy, but more I study this, more I think that it's not only the scientific analysis which is necessary, it's a kind of an art. And Professor Geremik was somebody, and I come to this big reason for our conference. Professor Geremik, I think, was exactly the person who was able to turn his analysis into a real art. And I think that this is something which we should follow in our analysis and our practical policy. Thank you.
Robert Legvold from New York, Columbia University, and the Euro-Atlantic Security Initiative. I've been very interested in the two strains to the conversation. The topic is values and interests, and the degree to which that is a problem now, diverging interests, whatever were the common values, that affect the U.S.-European relationship. And then that second strain that Ivan introduced, which is the real question is capacity. The capacity, whatever the condition of the U.S.-European relationship, to shape the agenda, that is, to determine the question, not simply a degree to which we're able to dominate the answers to the question that we have determined. Dan Fried said a moment ago that unless we're able to pull together, the United States and Europe, we're not going to like the agenda that others impose. My own view is that the link between values, interests, and the other question of capacity is working in a somewhat different fashion with respect to the outside world. The BRICS, that is China, Russia, India, and Brazil, or even a country like Turkey. And I think the problem that we're seeing is, yes, a rising China with its ambitions, indeed now going beyond the narrow position that China has taken within the region itself to exercise itself, at least economically, on a global basis. The Brazilians beginning to also exercise a larger role. The Turks under Erdogan, since the 2007 election, particularly moving in a striking direction, yes, assert themselves, but I think they're also following a hedging strategy. If you looked at the FT report on China, and the investments that it's making economically, not only within Asia, but now within Latin America, particularly within Brazil in the near term, there are a number of people who believe that China is doing what it's doing globally, not merely to feed this massive modernization program, industrialization, but a hedge against an unreliable developed West. that it's not in the future going to be the kind of economic engine and opportunity that the Chinese would count on. If you look at the Turks, it appears, at least under the Erdogan government, that they are hedging. They're looking for an alternative strategy within region, no longer being the eastern outpost of a Euro-Atlantic world. That brings us back to the question of capacity in a slightly different way. It brings us back to Pierre's notion of capacity. That is the extent to which the United States, my country, and Europe, during this period of crisis and, if you will, integration stagnation, as I would describe it, can develop the kind of dynamism that will not cause an exaggerated version of the hedging strategy. I'm not denying that they have their separate ambitions, which will pose some of the problems that Dan described in terms of the agenda they would impose. But I think the issue is not merely a capacity on our part to shape the question in terms of international security. It's the question of the degree to which we can restore dynamism within our societies.
Leszek Jażdżewski, redaktor naczelny Liberty. Proszę wybaczyć, że zabieram głos wśród tylu wybitnych ekspertów, jednak należę do pokolenia, dla którego z jednej strony Ameryka kojarzy się z magicznym światem, z którego pochodzą piękne zabawki, a z drugiej strony do pokolenia, dla którego paszport europejski, możliwość podróżowania wszędzie na tym kontynencie jest faktem, który bardzo doceniamy. Wydaje mi się, że jesteśmy w momencie, w którym świat, który znamy, świat, który wymyśliła Europa, a Ameryka wciela w życie, przechodzi na naszych oczach do przyszłości. Bardzo się tego świata przyzwyczailiśmy, przynajmniej w Europie, i to przyzwyczajenie i ta zależność od Ameryki powoduje niestety bardzo wiele negatywnych faktów. Mianowicie zapominamy o prostej zasadzie: umiesz liczyć, licz na siebie. Brak zainteresowania Ameryki Europą, taki jaki mieliśmy w czasie zimnej wojny, jest wielkim Europy sukcesem. Oznacza to, że Europa przestała być miejscem, w którym zagrożenie jest codziennością. Jednocześnie to nie zafascynowanie Baracka Obamy Henrym Kissingerem, ale brak możliwości militarnych, ekonomicznych i politycznych powoduje, że jego polityka nie jest tak bardzo idealistyczna, jak niektórzy by oczekiwali, ale bardziej realistyczna. Po prostu Obama wie, że nie jest w stanie w Iranie, w Afganistanie, w wielu innych miejscach na świecie prowadzić takiej polityki, do jakiej ci, którzy są zwolennikami dominacji amerykańskiej, którzy do tej dominacji się przyzwyczaili, by oczekiwali. Pytanie, co to oznacza dla Europy fakt, że Ameryka właściwie po raz pierwszy, można powiedzieć, z Europy się wycofuje. Oznacza to, że będziemy musieli wziąć ciężar, którego od II wojny światowej brać na swoje barki nie chcieliśmy. Musimy go wziąć i ponieść sami. Dlaczego? Dlatego, że natura nie znosi próżni. Ja się zgadzam tutaj z tymi, którzy powiedzieli o tym, że pan profesor Rothfeld wspomniał o tym, że to nie jest tak, że nowe potęgi będą tymi potęgami, które będą odgrywały tę rolę, jaką odgrywały Stany Zjednoczone. Ale Stany Zjednoczone po prostu nie są w stanie odgrywać tej roli, jaką odgrywały wcześniej. Jednak świat nie znosi próżni, czyli jeśli wartości, które wierzymy, wartości, które, trzeba by nie powiedzieć o wszystkich administracjach amerykańskich, te wartości, które Ameryka wcielała w życie, czasem siłą, czasem w sposób niedopuszczalny, te wartości nie będą obowiązywać, to wtedy jedyną wartością, jaka będzie obowiązywać, będzie interest, będzie siła. Będzie powrót do koncertu mocarstw, jaki znamy z Europy. To będzie koncert mocarstw światowy. Koncert, w którym się będzie liczyła siła Chin, siła Rosji, siła Iranu. Nie będą obowiązywały wartości. Ten świat dla Europejczyków, dla wszystkich mieszkańców krajów miłujących demokrację będzie światem bardzo niebezpiecznym. Kończąc, przyznam, że bardzo żałuję, że prezydent Komorowski musiał wyjść w trakcie tego panelu, dlatego że tak naprawdę wydaje mi się, że mimo, że rozumiem żale Europejczyków pod adresem Ameryki, nie przyjmuję takiej filozofii, w której patrzymy na naszego sąsiada przez Atlantyk i oczekujemy, zróbcie coś dla nas, z drugiej strony go krytykując. Prawda jest taka, że piłka jest po naszej stronie. Jeśli zrozumiemy, że wyłącznym interesem, naszym interesem nie chodzi tu o jakieś szumne ideały, chodzi o zwykły interes nas żyjących w Europie, jest to, żebyśmy wymyślili, co to znaczy europejska racja stanu. Zjednoczonej Europy, która będzie odgrywała rolę taką, jaką odgrywają inne światowe mocarstwa na arenie międzynarodowej. Bez tego będziemy żyli nie w changing world, ale world of fear, world of insecurity, world of chaos. Dziękuję.
Dziękuję bardzo. Ktoś jeszcze? Ja nie widziałem. So I think that now in reverse order answer first, and then Pierre.
So, I do believe it's a conversation. It's not about questions, and as a result of it, I just want to touch on the three of the things that are coming. And I very much agree with the fact that this is not simply capacity in terms of how much military power you have, or even what is the economic power that you have. Because one of the things that strikes me talking to people these days, if 10 years ago, people were going to be fascinated how democracy are going to remake the world. Now people are very much fascinated how demography is going to remake the world. And you can see this also in domestic politics, both in Europe and the US, but also in the world. Demographic imagination is driving people happy or mad. You're basically already living in the world in which basically there are going to be billions of Indonesians and things like this. I do believe this is important because this is also one of the results of the globalization. You discover that the world in which you're living is not the world that you know. And from this point of view, unfortunately, part of the problem with Europeans even more than with the Americans is that if you ask what we want to stop the time. We want to stop the time. We like it the way it is now. In a certain way, Europe is a good place to live. It's not a very good place to dream, but otherwise it's a good place to... So we start to develop a certain type of a security personality which is typical for aging people. So from this point of view, I really believe that European Union is a kind of a retired power. It's a different than declining power. It's not about decline, it's about retirement. So from this point of view, you're trying to adjust. And if this is the case, I do believe that plus values and interests, there is one very important category that starts to matter, and this is the experience. Our experience, but also the experience of the others. I'm going to give one example. When basically the financial crisis started, now there is quite a lot of information that there was a very different reaction on the Chinese and on the Russian side. At some point, Russians have been even talking to the Chinese. Should we start basically selling dollars? And Chinese said, no, no. Why such different reactions? I don't believe it's about values. And even I don't believe it's about interests. But it's based on two totally different, profound experiences. Russian society knows that it is possible a superpower to collapse over several years because this happened to them. So from this point of view, looking in the United States in crisis, they do believe that basically the American is going to hell in the way it happened to the Soviet Union. Chinese, they're on a long run. They don't believe that the great powers can basically disappear in a decade. They need basically 2, 3, 4 decades. This type of experience has nothing to do, in my view, with the values. It does not have anything to do with the interest in the way we're talking about it. It has to do with the worldview and basically how we're experiencing the world. And I do believe that this is something that is missing, not in this debate, but in general in the Western debate. Carl Schmitt in the 1950s, for good reasons, said the victors are losing curiosity. I do believe part of the problem with the Western debate of the world today is we are not very curious about the others. We can talk about them, we're even trying to study them, we're really not very much interested. And to end basically with Professor Geremek, I do believe that he was going to be very important for this debate exactly because of the fact that he was a curious man, not because he was a wise man.
Thank you very much, Pierre.
Well, I'll continue where Ivan just left, because I've often thinking in particular about the interventions in Asia and so on. I always quote the French proverb saying, si jeunesse savait, si vieillesse pouvait. If the young would know and if the old would be able to. And in a way, I think that's Europe. I don't think it's retired, but I think it has a reaction reaction of experience of not wanting to do the mistakes of the past, and America have the energies, the dynamism, the optimism, and as I was saying, there should be some middle between the two. So there is something to this thing of youth and age. But what I was driving at, and which Bob could very well, and Daniel, is that in a way, in order to change the world, we have to change ourselves in the new situation of the world. So it's not a question whether the Chinese can be responsible or whether we should send the agenda. It's no longer the question. We are no longer ruling the world. We are no longer able to be both the judge, the policeman, the executioner. If there is a debate, it will come as out of discussion, out of dialogue, and this dialogue will not be an abstract dialogue. It will be based as also on power. So there was a time when America's credo was not to be entangled in the affairs of Europe and so on, Washington's farewell address, John Adams and so on. Then America became responsible. The Chinese are, I think, a great danger, but also I'm told, it's not my specialty, that they are beginning on some ways about greening, about the climate, to take more audacious measures than the United States does. And the problem of the United States, I always come back to that. I think Obama has both imagination. In some ways, I think it goes too far. I don't believe in a nuclear-free world and so on. But he has a view, and he has an ability to put himself in the place of various others. But the system in America is very difficult to move. And America to play this role and Europe to play their role, since I started with the climate, which is not my specialty, but take Copenhagen. The Europeans thought, here we are ahead, we have a good plan, and so on. What happened is that Obama had to force the entry into the room where the agents were talking, and that he arrived at something of an agreement with the Chinese, the Indians, the South Africans, and where the Brazilians are, and Brazil. And the Europeans felt very frustrated because they didn't have the power or the tactics to impose themselves. But what happens home? America can do nothing on the climate because it's blocked by the Congress. And one shouldn't underestimate this, the fact that in a way, the country which has to change most, the country which has both the power and the enthusiasm to change is America. But the one which has to change most in its conception is America. You remember when Carter tried in 2 addresses to say it's a different world and we have to change our ways and so on. It was a disaster. And then Reagan came and said, no, we are winning. And he had this confidence both domestically and the financial things and exuberance and so on, and internationally. And now there is no longer room for that, and there is no longer room either for retirement. So I completely agree that Europe and America have to try together to make their contribution to the agenda. But on the other hand, it's not simply for us to dictate it. People as powerful as us may and will have their own ideas.
Well, no, I agree with a lot of the comments that were mentioned about framing the agenda and the capacity to and the political support to then back up the agenda, to link the delivery comment with Janusz Onyszkiewicz and others, and Dan Fried mentioned, and that is one source, though, I would say, indeed, of disappointment and a sense of tension in U.S.-European relations right now. To take it back to a political level, frankly, Obama faces criticism from Republicans on the notion that, well, it's great that
Europe loves you. 78% of the people think you're wonderful, but what have they done for you lately in Afghanistan? Why have they not fulfilled the commitments on trainers for the Afghan security forces? What about the police? What about developing civil society there? All these other things that haven't been happening. So I think there is that question of we can dream quite a bit. We can be quite effective in trying to set the agenda, but if we can't deliver, and this goes to the United States too, because I think there is a certain war weariness or fatigue about this era that we've seen of a rather steady state of conflict. Our armed forces are facing enormous stress, both in terms of their equipment, but also in human capacity to absorb these kinds of frequent deployments and routine deployments. So there is a certain weariness, and so that brings us back to, well, we do need these other partners, and it won't always be based on values. It will be based on narrow interests where we can work together with some of these other countries that do have, and may also offer some ideas and approaches that we can take on board. I do want to touch on, though, the one point that Eugenia Smolar noted. I actually was going to mention it in my remarks, just so I didn't look completely optimistic about the continuing convergence of values and interests. And I don't mean to reopen the whole Mars and Venus debate with this, but I do think there is an element out there that you do see, and I noticed it very starkly. I have to say, when I was working this year with a group of experts, we met with some of the EU Commission officials, and the postmodern, role of force in international affairs, the notion that some of the EU Commission leadership suggested that really most problems today are political and can be solved by a political dialogue or other technical means, and there's really no role for force, and hence very limited role for NATO in the future of managing global security and or dealing with any of the really big challenges that are out there. And I think that's clearly not where the U.S. is, and I think across the political spectrum, if you look at Secretary Gates in a speech in February and some other comments he's made this quite pointedly. He talked about the demilitarization of European thinking, and partly it's a benefit of what was alluded to earlier, in the sense that it's become very happy and prosperous and conflict-free zone, but yet we know, and Americans, partly because of the attacks of 9/11, feel this sense of more immediate threat. And I think the Europeans, who also share that threat, are the ones who are more, and the Canadians and others who feel that sense of threat, are some of the ones that are also more active in participating in Afghanistan and dealing with some of the other military, hard security problems around the world. So, how do we manage that difference? If that is because I don't think that the transatlantic partnership is sustainable. On the notion that, well, the United States will continue, and a few other allies will continue to take on the hard and dirty security tasks, and Europe can largely concern itself with development assistance and democratization and other kinds of good works, either in its limited only to its near periphery, as one comment suggested, that even Europe's vision of Central Europe sometimes doesn't extend so far, or is it more a broader vision? But and then on the question that Sparnowski raised about the de-idealization of action and thinking, I think it's a great notion, and indeed I think in the Soviet model it worked. But I was going to mention that my colleague in those first policy planning talks who came with me was a gentleman by the name of Frank Fukuyama, and of course he had a vision, as did Daniel Bell and several others, of a post-ideological world of the notion that we could, and we suddenly found there was a new ideology that emerged, the ideology of rooted in extremist visions of Islam and interpretation. So we had yet another ideology to grapple with. So I think that we have seen in many ways, I think you're right, a de-idealization of many aspects of East-West relations, and even to some extent in our relations with China, and at least the U.S. relationship with China, and some say to our detriment that we've given up on the democracy agenda with China. But that said, I do think that we will still see that there are these other ideologies that have proven polarizing and proven to raise new problems, both in the security domain, but also in terms of how we protect our other interests around the world. So, I don't know, I think I touched on at least some of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will finish now. I don't think I will not sum up. We will develop further several points which were discussed in our further session. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much to panelists.